Last week we looked at Welles, who's someone who has influenced almost every film. The trailer last week, and just from those compositions you can see things that Anderson uses, way he frames, the way he moves the camera, multiple kinds of images in the frame. This is something, even though Welles is working in 1942, Anderson is picking that up and using that. Thematically, the expressiveness, the over-the-top nature of some of the characters, the performances, and the themes, sic transit gloria, glory fades, as Max says in Rushmore. This is definitely something we see in Orson Welles also, the pernicious and yet attractive aspects of ego, and dysfunctional families, certainly. And just as Mike Nichols has a philosophy of filmmaking that mirrors his attitude toward life, in Orson Welles' life, Anderson sees a value in resilience, in dealing with repeated obstacles and misfortunes. Welles had early success. He was a child wonderkind. He was hailed as a genius and a child prodigy. His War of the Worlds radio broadcast and Citizen Kane were history-making events that happened in his early 20s. And yet, he never had that kind of success ever again after his early 20s. And yet, he went on. He went on to direct nearly 50 films. He acted. He became one of the most recognizable voices in popular media, in film, in television commercials. He kept going, having the respect of some, the derision of other people. He's someone who was condescending and difficult and prickly. So he had enemies and people who had respected him. But even though commercial success was elusive, he didn't let that stop him from going on and trying to make new art, and trying to push boundaries with whatever resources he could put together. So I urge you to see more Orson Welles films. They're all interesting. He's someone who's always trying to do something interesting, to use the media in an interesting way. And look for the connections to Anderson's work as you watch Welles films. Pay special attention, of course, to the line between Magnificent Ambersons and to today's film, The Royal Tenenbaums, which is Wes Anderson's third feature. With this film, Anderson's unique style has matured. By all accounts, with Royal Tenenbaums, we see the Wes Anderson style becomes established. And he leaves Texas for the first time in terms of film locations. Setting his film in kind of an unnamed city. It's kind of a fictionalized, idealized New York City of the 1970s, but not specifically New York. You'll notice there are no specific landmarks, specific references. It's for all intents and purposes what we know and think of as New York, but it's an idealized, unnamed city. While he had one big star foisted upon him with Bottle Rocket, and he invited one big star on Rushmore, with Tennenbaums he has an all-star cast, including 3 Oscar winners: Gene Hackman, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Angelica Houston. And the rest of the cast are all award-winning talents in their own right. There's an identifiable tone in this new sincerity movement that he's part of, that I talked about last week. The tension between irony and sincerity. Anderson creates kind of a fusion of these opposites. That's becoming what he's known for. You're off balance. You're trying to make sense of what's real. Artificial aesthetics and situations, and real emotions. The emotional journeys are at the center of these films. The Royal Tenenbaums comes out in 2001. Again, it's written with Owen Wilson, but at this point Wilson's acting career is really taking off. Their screenplay will be nominated for an Academy Award, but this is the last script that Anderson and Wilson will work on together. Royal Tenenbaums is narratively framed with a device. Remember with Rushmore we had the curtains opening and closing to give you a sense of the different acts, and that this is like a play that you're coming to watch. So with Tenenbaums, it's presented as a book, which we kind of see introduced at the beginning, and there's narration. Like there's a book narrator, Alec Baldwin's voice, this stentorian, sort of very high-class intellectual voice who narrates the story. It's a framing device that emphasizes storytelling. This is something that Anderson will do regularly. He's saying, here, let me tell you a story. With Tennenbaums, you know, there's more of this kind of mugshot staging. It's an old-fashioned style that he makes his own. More of those graphic close-ups that we saw in Rushmore. He also uses a kind of Buster Keaton humor kind of staging. I really recommend seeing some old Buster Keaton movies. Neighbors, The General. There's a kind of wackiness, zaniness quality that Anderson gets from looking at these wonderful old Buster Keaton films. There's an absurd geometry to the staging. It lends a childlike perspective, again, to the look of the piece. Look at the symmetry of the compositions, the loaded compositions that we're used to thinking about, you know, the Wes Anderson look. That comes into play much more in Tennenbaums than we've seen previously. I want you to ask yourself, does this whole movie feel like one of Max's plays from Rushmore? There's a made-up quality to all of Tennenbaums, a sense of kids play acting adult roles, but it's made more elaborate here. There's an artificial quality to the whole film. Everything's just a little off kilter, a little fanciful. This kind of fabulous heightened reality that we get a sense of from Anderson. Again, this is again more of the kind of signature style. If you're looking for realism, naturalism, that's not Anderson. That's not what he's after. And here he's really refining that look, that feel. You can let it distance you, you can dismiss it, or you can engage with it. And of course, I want to invite you to engage with this emotionally heightened reality and view of the world. The guiding focus here is love within a dysfunctional family. The pain wrought by divorce is here made vivid and expressionistic. The emotional wounds are made physical. Characters are not just traumatized, many of them are actually physically and mentally injured. Anderson again draws from his own experiences where his father left and the family disintegrated. Even though the father had problematic influences, he was also kind of the glue that kept everyone together and engaged. Struggling against obstacles creates a sense of engagement, connection, and in Anderson, that's where the value is. It's a little hard to accept, but it's a common dynamic we're going to see in Anderson's worlds, and maybe in ours. I'll be interested in your thoughts on the dynamic of this film. The Unnamed City is, again, a kind of childlike view of a city. As Rushmore was a child's view of adulthood, in Tennenbaums we have another child's fantasy of urban life. Incomplete, surreal, injected with kind of odd, fantastic elements, nostalgia, idealized views of the past. Anderson says some of his influences were children's novels. Helen Cresswell's Bagthorpe saga, E.L. Konigsberg's From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Franksweiler, and Gene George's My Side of the Mountain, which was also made into a movie in 1969. The latter two stories are about New York City kids who run away from home for adventure and escape from the lives that they find troubling. In Mixed Up Files, a brother and sister go and run away and live inside the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In My Side of the Mountain, a boy runs away from New York City and lives in the wilderness. In Tennenbaums, there's a dissatisfaction with New York City life, though the characters seem caught in it, unable to move or to change. It's a story about characters learning, struggling hard to become independent and self-sufficient. Can we do it alone? Should we do it alone? Should we insist on doing it alone? These are what questions the characters are struggling with. Anderson's friend and colleague Noah Baumbach has said about Anderson's worlds, The world is looking at us, burdening us with expectations, which we can only manage to disappoint. To disappoint expectations. This seems to be a meditation within the Andersonian world, which is only occasionally overcome. We think of The Graduate and Ben Braddock. He's a blank slate onto which everyone places, these high expectations. But they're not his expectations. He doesn't know what expectations he has of himself. And this is a similar dynamic to Anderson's characters. Tennenbaums is an amplification of Anderson's previous works in both style and detail, production value. He's got a bigger budget, he's got a bigger cast, there are just a lot more moving parts, so it's just, you can see it as an extension. As Anderson says, there's the thrill of the long take. It creates suspense, something's going to go wrong. When will this take end? There's suspense just from the visceral, in-the-moment sense of this long take, of wondering where it's going to go. Something Anderson plays with dramatically to pull you along in the storytelling. There are many film reference Easter eggs in Royal Tenenbaums. The Dalmatian hamsters you're going to see, the wardrobe of various characters. There's a go-kart scene that references the car chase from The French Connection, which Gene Hackman starred in. Wes Anderson is having fun with these things. Is that wrong? This is a question, to fill the movie with all these references. It's part of his constant side conversation that he's having about the value of film and storytelling and the desire to share with you the enthusiasm for these moments of engagement and wonder within the story and the storytelling process. Other inspirations. I've mentioned children's literature inspirations. Tennenbaums is also, of course, inspired very much by the Magnificent Ambersons, the house as the anchor location, the royal family, the faded glory theme, the dangers of clinging to reputation and achievement at the cost of your own desires and proper values. Anderson's love of Orson Welles is going to be evident as you go through this movie. He said he came up with the basic idea for Tennenbaums while listening to a Benjamin Britten string quartet. The kind of broken feel had the tone of the story. It popped into his mind a little bit there. Other influences were the J.D. Salinger stories of the Glass family, the novel Franny and Zoe. If you haven't read that, it's a good thing to do in the next week or so. The Whit Stillman film Metropolitan had come out just a few years before and really captured this sort of New York elite society way of young people relating to each other. That character's ill-prepared to deal with adulthood because of how they've been brought up. That's a great theme of Metropolitan. And the dysfunctional family dynamics in Truffaut's films as well. If you've ever seen Two English Girls, it's one of Truffaut's early films. Two English Girls is another film about a dysfunctional family that he's drawing from. The painter Miguel Calderón, for visuals, something that he displays in the character Eli Cash's apartment. Cash is characterized in the film as an elegant poser. The paintings, like the Eli Cash character, have kind of a lovable fakeness to them. Charming, but not trustworthy. This is a recurring Anderson trope. So try and take a look at Miguel Calderón paintings, and you'll see some of those in the film. He also emulates the photographer Richard Avedon in the film for some wonderful compositions. In music, he's using Rolling Stones songs, among other vintage pop, for expressive effect. It places you in a different time. This is a device that brings forward that sense of dreamy nostalgia. You're just a step away from the contemporary and the real. It's familiar, but it's not the here and now. He doesn't want to lock you into assigning a specific time or place for the movie. The look is largely from the 70s, but the music is from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. It's not placed. He's wants you to be in the story and not trying to nail it down to this is what it's about, this is the time, this is the place. It's about the characters. It's about the emotional journey. On this film, Anderson was relentless about details, but at the same time, he wants to be surprised by the actors. He's aware how Bill Murray's energy and the chaos that he brought enlivened this, heavily composed construction that is his working method on Rushmore. So he's inviting that energy now with a host of great actors he's bringing in. He wants that mix. That is something he sees as the style of film he wants. Some of it he can control tightly, some of it he gets by inviting in people who are going to somehow bring that. And he's going to, again, trust the craft, trust the process to make that happen. For every filmmaker, there's always a balance or tension between, your personal intent and audience expectations. Anderson's aware of both. However, one could say audience is a loaded term. What kind of audience do you want? Your audience, what do you expect them to do? Do you want them to be passive? Do you want them to be engaged? Anderson always seems to want to be in conversation with the audience, to make you work a little harder and give you a little more for that effort. And of course, for Anderson, form and theme go hand in hand. In Anderson's world, for his characters and for his audience, the point is usually to learn and accept and even enjoy a world in which expectations remain unmet. The things that you're expecting to happen don't quite happen, and you've got to lean in and figure out what's going on. It's very interesting to hear Anderson's cast members talk about what struck them about the movie and working with Anderson, because he doesn't so much explicate what it's about, what's the motivation, but this is a process that a lot of the collaborators work on. And so, through interviews you can get a really wonderful sense of what's going on for the actors in how they're working with Anderson. Angelica Houston won an Academy Award for Prizzi's Honor. Plays the mother in Royal Tenenbaums. Saw Wes Anderson on this film as young, as naive, as still learning his craft. Anderson, she said, didn't know what Eggs Benedict was. He didn't consciously get the connection between her character and Anderson's real mother, even though her character Etheline, after she gets divorced, becomes an archaeologist, and that's exactly what Wes Anderson's mother did after she became divorced. And Angelica Houston actually wears Anderson's mother's glasses in the film. And yet Anderson is loath to say, well, yes, that's my mother I'm putting here. Gwyneth Paltrow saw that when her character's father dismisses her, it has an adverse effect on her ability to commit as an adult. That's something that's been broken by that damaged family. Luke Wilson saw his character as, the favorite, but someone who was flawed and emotionally dependent on that misplaced praise he got as a youth. With the beard and the sunglasses that the character wears, it's as if he's hiding. He doesn't want to be seen and exposed. But as he ages, he notices more what's going on. Just as his falcon sees things. He has a pet falcon in the story. And he sees his emotional state and his emotional handicaps, and yet he's still powerless to overcome those things. He's become a little like his father, he sees. This is what Luke Wilson is seeing about his own character. It's interesting. Who do you start to see yourself resembling despite your best intentions? Owen Wilson, who plays kind of the neighbor kid who lives across the street. He's not part of the family, but he grew up playing with them. And he always wanted to be part of the Tennenbaum family. He wasn't really a part of them, but he wanted to. This family cohesion and this kind of royal quality of the Tennenbaum family was something that didn't really exist. But the Eli Cash character, Owen Wilson's character, wants to be part of this thing that is a fantasy, that's a projection in his own mind. And then there's Bill Murray, who plays a supporting role in Tennenbaums, but a quite interesting and important role thematically. His character is a scientist trying to figure out, the answer to the question, what is normal? And that's a tough question to answer. And personally, the character is trying to figure out, in the face of massive disappointments, what can you feel good about to get yourself through the day? Bill Murray said, you make your own imaginary trophies to, deal with, the depressing self-examination that you do every day. And Danny Glover, who was an actor known for physical, imposing characters, here he plays a very gentle accountant. And Danny Glover really relished that role. He noticed that the film celebrates people, humanity, even while flawed. And that genius is an abused term that often does more damage than helps. That's a lot of ideas. There's a lot going on in this film, but plot is not really one of them. You can't sit passively and wait for something to happen in this film. Life is happening in every moment of the film. And perhaps that's part of Anderson's message too. I'll be very interested to hear your thoughts on Tennenbaums and what you get out of it. Rushmore had been a modest indie hit, and it positioned Anderson as a leading talent to watch. At this point, when he's making Tennenbaums, Anderson is so popular that Owen Wilson, Luke Wilson, and Danny Glover turned down Steven Soderbergh's Ocean's 11 blockbuster movie to make Royal Tenenbaums, which was a much more, limited indie kind of film, even though it's still a studio movie, but made in an indie vein. And Tennenbaums was popular and generally well received, although it got a lot of mixed reviews. People liked Anderson, they enjoyed the cast, but others felt it was a little dour, and especially after Rushmore, they wanted it to be funnier. The plot, if you can really find one here, is about partial moves, as I talked about last week, about damaged, imperfect people learning to cope with a broken, imperfect world. If sic transit gloria, glory fades, then what do we grab onto? Anderson is saying that we just have each other, family, friends, the class here, your audience, the audience you can share your feelings with and tell your stories to. Okay, so in a moment the movie, but I want you to note the assignments for next week. Your second research review is due next week. I want to know what you're reading, what you're watching in support of this Wes Anderson course. Keep reading. I recommend the McCormick article I've put up on Web Campus on French film influences on Wes Anderson. And I also put up on Web Campus a video series made by Matt Zoller of Sites, who did the book on Anderson. It's like a 5 or 6 part video series, but you should still be doing reading as well. And watch the actual movies. Start to delve more into French New Wave films, Godard. If you want something a little faster moving, see Breathless. Francois Truffaut, we're going to see Day for Night next week, but look at some of his earlier works. If you've never seen 400 Blows, this is an incredibly influential film. Look at Antonioni, an Italian filmmaker of the same period. La Ventura, a really influential film on Anderson, a wonderful movie. But if you're looking at these movies and you're waiting for something to happen, for the plot to occur, that's not what these movies are like. They're about life happening. They're about the characters progressing, and you have to pay attention to those moments. And they're wonderful films for that. You've got some extra time today in class, so I'd like you to write me a short email about what is your takeaway from Tennenbaums, having seen it. What do you notice about Anderson? And what is this film, what do these characters mean to you? Who do you relate to? write me a short email. Let me know your thoughts and reactions. I'd love to hear from you on that. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next week.